Hey everybody, welcome to Off the Shelf Board Game Reviews. This week we've been looking at the Apocrypha Adventure Card Game. It is a cooperative game for 1 to 6 players. Now in this specific video I'm just going to teach you how to play the game itself. If you want to see a quick overview, see some sample gameplay, or see my review of the game, check out those other videos in the series. This one is specifically going to teach you how to play the game itself. Now if you didn't watch the other videos, I'm going to give you a quick overview of exactly how the game plays. In the Apocrypha Adventure Card Game, every one of our players is a saint, and these saints have the special power, the ability to actually see the evils of the world. Think of it such as a Supernatural, or maybe a Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or more specifically Grimm, where you have the special power to see these weird creatures that have invaded our world, these dark, evil creatures. You can see them, nobody else can, and you've taken it upon yourself to take these evils out of the world and save the world from these horrible, evil creatures. Now the basic flow of the game is this is going to be basically a deck building game. Every single player is going to start the game with a hand of cards. Now at the very start of the game, every single player is going to build their deck of cards based on a suggested amount of cards that every single hero they basically suggest that you start with. Now every one of these suggested cards is going to be on the back of a divider, and I'll show you that divider when I explain the actual nuts and the bolts of the game. This is just a quick overview of how the game plays. As you play the game, as you go on these missions, as you go on these adventures, you're going to be slowly modifying your deck of cards. You're going to be adding extra abilities to your saint. You're even going to start getting these special cards which are called fragments. Now some of these fragments are fleeting fragments, meaning they're one-time use. Or as you start handling the tougher missions, the more powerful missions, the more challenging missions, you're going to start getting some enduring fragments, which are going to give your saint special abilities that are going to permanently modify how your saint plays. The trick is, as you start getting more of these powerful fragments that make your hero more powerful, the world itself is going to get much more challenging. You're going to notice that a lot of the omen cards, I'll explain those in a couple minutes, but the omen cards, the good omen cards, are going to start disappearing. You're going to be left with omens of doom, making life more difficult, much more challenging, adding to the difficulty of completing this long campaign of many chapters, many books, many missions, many themes are all going to go together to create the Apocrypha Adventure Card Game. Now the basic flow of the game is at the start of every turn, every single player is going to have their hand of cards. Now the size of your hand of cards is going to be based on your hero. Every one of these heroes has different abilities, different amount of rage, different amount of soul, different amount of mind, different amount of body. That's going to judge how many cards you have in your deck, and it's also going to judge how many dice you're going to roll, when you're going to roll these dice, and how you're going to affect the different environments of the game. But the basic idea of the game is once you have your deck of cards, you are going to use your hero and you're going to visit all these different nexuses. It's a fancy, very thematic way to say you're going to go to these different locations, which are nexuses of evil, of horrible encounters. Most of these nexuses are going to start on the doom side, and as you work through possibly having good omens working towards your favor, you're going to work towards turning these nexuses of doom to nexuses of hope in your hopes of defeating these evil creatures. As you visit these locations, you're going to play cards. Either you're getting cards from a clock, omens of hope, which are always good omens, or you're going to get omens of doom, which are bad omens, which are going to make your life more difficult. But you're going to use these omens to go ahead and explore your locations. You're going to explore these locations, you're going to run into threats, evil creatures such as werewolves, creatures of the night, monsters that are coming out there, things you've basically seen in your modern sci-fi shows. If you've seen it in a modern sci-fi show, it's probably going to show up in this game, whether it's creatures that go bump in the night, weird mutations, lycanthropes, crazy robots. Trust me, if you've seen it on TV, you're going to see it in this game. You're going to go after threats. You're going to go to different locations where you may locate things such as gifts. These gifts may be random items. They may be people who are going to help you. They can be weapons. They can be implements. They can be various different things that are going to help your mission, because your mission is to hunt down and take out the minions of the bad guys and eventually take out the horrible bad guys, the masters themselves. Now the masters and the minions, their cards are always left face out on the board so you can see exactly what you're tackling, but you're going to have a little bit of a card just shuffled into one of these locations that'll allow you to randomize how they're going to appear, but at all times the minions and the masters themselves are also going to be displayed out on this board. And basically this means that when you draw the master, you're going to have the card that represents that master and you get the statistics that you're going to fight. Same thing for the minions, but your basic idea is to search through all these locations, defeat the minions, defeat the masters, or whatever the requirements are for the mission, because this is a 100% a mission-based game. See, before you do anything, every single time you play the game, you are going to pick a mission. And this mission is going to give you your objective. And sometimes the missions are not just as cut as dry as hunting down a master, defeating him, putting a stake in his heart, and ending the bad guy's reign. Sometimes these missions are part of a larger campaign, and the effects of these missions are going to affect the overall campaign depending on what book you're playing through. but also every one of these missions has a different variety of how they're going to play. Some of the early missions are a little bit more on the simpler side, where your simple objective is maybe just hunt down a master. But as you start evolving through them, sometimes be more complicated things, such as instead of just hunting down a master, you need to save all the vital blood that's going in the blood bank that some evil cultists are taking. Or maybe in some later missions, you're going to run into a rogue AI, which is taking over all the electronic cars, all the electronics in the world, and all the computers in the world, trying to create this horrible doomsday. Or maybe it's some werewolves. Maybe it's the grandfather of the werewolves, the great lycanthrope himself. Something along those lines. You're going to have a grand mission, and your eventual objective is to complete that mission. And every time you complete one of these missions, if you're successful, the earlier easy missions will allow you to unlock these fleeting fragments. Now, these fleeting fragments are going to give your heroes temporary abilities. Once you use that temporary ability, that fleeting fragment is going to be removed from the game, and you're not going to get it back. But as you start taking on the tougher missions are going to give you what is called an enduring fragment. These enduring fragments are going to give your hero extra special abilities, and they're going to stick with you for the entire campaign. The trick is, the more of these enduring fragments you have, the more omens of hope are going to start disappearing from the game. And when I mean disappearing, they're permanently removed from the game. They're going to be stuck in a stash, and the stash is removed from the game. You basically don't have access to it until you decide to reset the entire campaign and start everything all over again. Now, Apocrypha is a combination of a dice, call it a game where you're trying to take the randomness of dice, hedge your bets, and make it so the dice come out in your favor. It's a combination of rolling dice and playing cards smartly to overcome different obstacles. Now, as you play the game, every one of these obstacles is going to have a challenge number. And this challenge number can be something as easy such as maybe only need to roll a 10 or higher. But some of these challenges are going to start getting much higher than that. Some of them require you to roll an 18 or higher. And even though you may get a whole handful of dice to roll, barring special cards that you may play, the maximum amount of dice you can ever use to resolve one of your rolls is going to be 3. So you need to take the highest rolling dice. So basically, you're playing cards to hedge your bets, to manipulate the dice, maybe flip dice over to the other side, maybe add extra dice to give you higher chances of getting those better rolls. But the cards you play are going to affect the amount of dice you roll. But the grand objective is to roll these dice, overcome these challenge levels, and if you overcome these challenge ratings for these gifts, you'll gain these gifts to be added to your hands. If it's a threat and you overcome the challenge rating, you're going to defeat it. But if the opposite happens and you don't manage to defeat a threat, they're going to go back into the deck, and you're going to maybe encounter them at a later date. Or these magical items, these rewards, and these gifts, if you don't overcome them, they're going to be sacrificed, removed from that specific mission, shuffled back in the box. They may come back in a later mission, but you don't know, because every time you play one of these missions, you're going to shuffle up every one of these nexuses with a certain amount of cards. Some of them are going to have a certain kind of cards that are good cards. Some are going to have a certain amount of bad cards, but they basically are going to have anywhere from 8 to 10 cards in every one of these locations. Your objective is to go through that nexus, complete whatever the mission goal is required. That's going to help you seal these nexuses, and most likely your eventual goal is to seal all the nexuses, hunt down, defeat the final master, and win the game and move on to the rest of the campaign. Now, that's a quick overview of how the game plays. Let's go ahead and clean all this up and actually break everything down to show you exactly how to play the Apocrypha Adventure Card Game. Now that you have a basic overview of exactly how the game plays, let's go ahead and break everything down and show you what is the stars of the show, or at least one of the stars of the show, and that is going to be the Saints. Now, every single player is going to control one Saint, or if you want to play this game solo, you are more than welcome to play with one Saint, or I recommend playing with at least 2 Saints, because I explained this in my review, but the best way I think to play the game is with at least 2 Saints. I'm not going to rehash my video review here, but just understand that, in my opinion, at least 2 Saints is how you want to play a game, even if you're playing the game solo. So the basic thing you need to do before you can do anything is every single player needs to pick a Saint. Now, every one of these Saints has different statistics, and there's 4 statistics for every one of our Saints. There is the red statistic, which is rage. There is the blue statistic, which is soul. There is the purple statistic, which is going to be your mind. And then there is the green statistic, which is going to be your body. So if you look at every one of our heroes, and I have right now Matthew out just as an example, you're going to see that our body happens to be 4. So that means when we're making a body check, barring anything changing it, we get to roll 4 dice. We have a soul of 2, which means whenever we're making a soul check, we're going to roll 2 dice. We have a rage of 2, which means when we make a rage check, we're going to roll 2 dice. And we have a mind of 3, and whenever we make a mind check, we are going to roll 3 dice. Basically, the total of all your statistics should add up to 11, because you're going to have 11 cards in your starting deck. And your starting deck is going to be based on exactly what's on the back of your divider. It's going to tell you exactly which cards you want to have in your starting deck Now you don't have to follow this. If you want, you can randomly choose any cards you want of that total number, so you can never have more than your starting stat and that many of that stat's cards. So that is to say that if you have 2 rage, that means you can't start with more than 2 rage cards in your deck. If you happen to have 3 mind, you can't start with more than 3 mind cards in your deck. And that's the most amount of those cards you can ever have, barring enduring fragments. That's going to allow you to break those rules. So I highly suggest you build your characters based on the stats and the cards they tell you to start with. If you don't want to, you can just randomly pick cards, as long as you're only picking alpha cards. The way you tell an alpha card is they have this symbol on the upper right hand card of every single one of the cards. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to look at the back of your divider card. Again, these are 2-sided dividers. On the back of your divider card, it's going to tell you how many cards you're going to have for every one of your stats and the specific cards you're going to take. It's going to add up to 11 cards for every one of our heroes. And again, basically what we're going to do is we're going to find the cards. For example, we got the pink taser listed right here. We're going to have the sword cane, again, listed right here. And we're going to get a total of 11 cards, and that's going to be the starting deck for every one of our heroes. As we adventure, we're going to get the potential ability to remove cards from this deck and replace them with more powerful cards. The more powerful cards have more powerful abilities to manipulate dice, more powerful abilities to overcome our adversaries and overcome the challenges that we need to overcome to complete every one of these missions and complete this very large campaign of a lot of different missions. So as you're playing the game, you know that your starting deck here is going to be modified, but at the end of, or the beginning of every single mission and at the end of every mission, there's going to be omen cards that are going to be also added to your deck. And the way you're going to find out exactly how that is at the start of every single game. When you first get your very first saint, make sure you look at your saint right here, because you're going to see 2 other stats on every one of your saints. The first number here in the star, this shows how many random omens you're going to get in your deck every time you start a mission. And at the end of every single mission, you're going to remove any omens that are in your deck. So at the end of every single mission, you're going to be back down to your starting 11 cards. When you start a new mission, you're going to grab this many omens, and you're going to pick them randomly from the omen stack. And again, you're going to randomize these, which means you may end up getting good omens, or if you manage to dig through this deck, you may end up getting bad omens. So it is random how you're going to start with these cards, but again, you're going to start with that many omens, randomly drawn from the omen deck, and you're going to shuffle this into your 11 cards, which basically means every one of our heroes is going to start with 15 cards. So now that you got your hand of cards, let's go ahead and explain the halo and how the halo can lead to death or even fragments, which are going to add to the power of every one of our saints. After every single mission, our heroes are going to get the chance to gain deaths, never a very good thing, or we're going to get the chance to gain fragments. Now, some of these fragments are going to be randomly drawn fleeting fragments. Some of these fragments are going to be fragments we're going to gain from completing missions. If we successfully complete a mission, we're going to get a fragment that the heroes get a chance to have the chance to obtain at the end of every single mission. If you fail a mission, you don't get that fleeting fragment. And matter of fact, if you keep failing missions and other bad things happen, you're going to continue to get deaths. If one of our heroes ever gets a 9th death, that hero is dead and they're actually removed from the campaign. Now, this isn't a legacy game. Obviously, we're not going to tear up the cards because legacy games are bad. But all joking aside, basically if one of your saints dies, you're going to put them what's called a stash. Now, the stash is very important. As you're playing the game, you're going to be slowly adding more and more cards to the stash. And basically, generally speaking, now there's some missions, or I should say there's some storybooks that are going to break this, but generally speaking, once a card goes into the stash, it's pretty much removed from your campaign. The only way it's ever going to come back into the game if a card or ability or rule specifically tells you to remove a card from the stash. But as you play, if a saint ever gets their 9th death, that saint is going to go into the stash, which means you can't use that saint for any more of the campaign missions. As you play the game, you're going to learn that some of your omens that you're gaining, specifically the omens of hope, are slowly also going to be going into the stash. If you read every single one of these omens, it's going to tell you that something is going to trigger this omen. When it is used, it's not going to go into the discard pile or the sacrifice pile. It's actually going to be removed from the game and put in the stash. And once it's in the stash, you're never going to get it again unless you start a new campaign. Which basically means as you're playing the game, more of these omens of hope are going to be removed from the game, and more of these omens of doom are going to continue to add to the game, adding to the complexity, adding to the challenge of the game. But I'm getting kind of ahead of myself here because I want to explain exactly how the halo works. Now, what the halo is at the start of every single one of these adventures, after you complete the first adventure, you're going to be able to gain some fragments. Now, the fragments you're going to gain are either going to be random fragments you're going to draw from a stack of cards. At the end of every mission, you're going to randomize it a little bit. Or again, if you succeed, you're also going to get the chance to gain the fragment associated with that mission. And then at the end of every mission, you're going to put these with your stack of cards, with your 11 cards, and you can put it in the box until you're ready to play your next mission. When you're ready to play your next mission, you must take all of the fleeting fragments you managed to gain through however many missions you managed to complete, and then you must take all the deaths you managed to gain, however many missions you managed to complete, and then you're going to arrange these around your saint in a halo. Now there's a trick on how you add these to your halo. Specifically, you need to go orthogonal first before you can go diagonal. And basically they're saying that is because you need to make sure the cards are touching on the sides, not on the diagonals. So if I only have one fragment, and it happens to be a fleeting fragment, I don't have any deaths yet, I need to put it on one of the orthogonal sides. Once I manage to get a second card, it can go next to this one as long as they're touching on the sides. And as you continue gaining cards, you can continue to add them on diagonals as long as you're continuing to get these cards and you're adding them to your halo. Now, why is it very important on how these cards are positioned? Because as you're going to learn, as I explain the rules here, the positioning of cards, the positioning of your attributes, and the position of the other players around the table affect what kind of cards you can play on the other players. For example, any card that is on the right side of your saint, you can play on the player to your right to help them. Any card to the left of your saint, you can play on the player to the left of yourself. Any card that's on your bottom row of your saint in your halo, you can play on yourself. Any card that's on the top, as long as the rules allow it, you can play on any saint who happens to be at the same location for you. So as you're playing the game, it behooves you to start positioning these cards in ways that allows you to have the most amount of use, the most amount of ability to help other players, because a card that's in one of the diagonals is actually in two separate locations, doubling the ability to use these cards on other players. So all these cards in this top halo can be used on any saint on your location, but this card is in the top and it's also in the right. So this card right here I can use on any saint in my location, or I can use it on the player to my right. This card right here I can use on myself, or I can use it on the saint to my left because it occupies 2 rows. The trick is, the more deaths you have, the more of these deaths you are required to slot, which means you may have all these fragments here, but as you gain too many deaths, they're going to start covering all your fragments because you have to slot every single one of your deaths every time you play the game. And if you ever get to the point where you have to slot a 9th death on top of your saint is dead, they're removed from the game, they're added to the stash. You must continue this campaign with your remaining saints, trying to go through all these evils to save the world. Once you've chosen your saint and you've got your saint deck ready and you're prepared to start playing the game, the first thing you need to do now is you need to pick your mission. Now, I highly suggest you go through the entire Candle Point campaign. Now, this game does have a very open campaign structure. What that means is you can basically jump around from storybooks to campaigns to missions as you like, and you're going to gain different abilities. Some may be fleeting fragments, some different gifts, different things that you can be able to keep and carry on through all these missions. But I highly suggest you stick with Candle Point. I would actually recommend clearing all of Candle Point before you go on to any other missions. Now, the reason why is because those other storybooks are going to start adding in extra mechanics and extra complexities to the game. Candle Point is a nice, easy, structural tutorial on how to play the game. And the nice thing about Candle Point is it starts off fairly easy, and it does start allowing it to ramp up quite a bit. By the time you're done with Candle Point, you're going to have a rough idea of the difficulties you're going to have once you start playing the actual full-fledged storybooks. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to pick the first adventure you want to do. I would highly suggest, for thematic reasons, just going through the actual story of Candle Point. And the story of Candle Point is you're spending a year in Candle Point. And as you're spending time throughout the months, various different things are going to start happening throughout the countryside of Candle Point. It's going to end up with starting with a polar plunge. It's going to end up with Christmas having a very unique spin. It does tell a very nice little story, and I highly recommend you go through it because it is a lot of fun. But the basic idea is you're going to start with the very first adventure, and I would suggest starting with the adventure, Taking the Plunge. And this is going to start with some thematic text, basically read the thematic text, and then it's going to tell you how to build this mission. Now, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get the structures. Now, structures is a fancy word of saying special rules for your mission. The way this is going to work is you're going to take your stack of structure cards, signified by the word structure on the back, and you're going to go through all these structure cards until you're able to spell this sentence that's in bold print, minus the bad guy you're fighting. So basically, you're looking for the word corner, because that's the structure you want. Ignore Wendigo, because we know that's our bad guy, but we're looking for along the trail, which is this structure right here, as the hours pass, which is the structure card right here. That's how all the missions are going to work. You're basically going to grab 3 structure cards which are going to help you spell the sentence, minus your basic bad guy that you're going after. As you see as you go through this, your structure is going to continue to spell sentences such as gather vital fluids. Vital fluids is the main true threat you're fighting. The rest of the structure is going to spell cards, or use the structure cards to spell the sentences. And that's going to go through all the missions that you're going to go through. After you figure out which special structures you're going to have to build this mission and what special rules you're going to have, it's going to tell you which locations you're going to use depending on the amount of players. And it's going to have a number of players, and it's going to have a plus sign, so if you have that many players or more, that location is going to be included. So now this basic structure is very easy. It does not matter how many players you have playing it. It's always only 4 structures. It's a tutorial mission. It's supposed to be pretty darn easy. But as you start going through later ones, you're going to see that if you're playing 1 player, you have the hospital, 1 player the school, 1 player the shelter. If you have 3 more players, you're going to add the university for 4 locations. If you have 4 more players, you're going to add the manor plus all these other locations. 5 more players, you're going to add the theater plus all these other locations. And finally, if you play with 6 players, you're going to add in the precinct, so you're going to have all these different locations. Now, the actual name of the location will be in bold. The other rest of the information afterwards is just for thematic text. So you will use the Motel Nexus, but for thematic text, it's going to be the Harlequin Hotel. You're going to lay out every one of these nexuses, and every single nexus will start off doom side face up. Every one of these nexuses is double-sided. You're going to have your hope side listed right here, and you notice the card is a different color. It's a more lighter color to match the omen of hope. And then the doom side, which every one of these cards should start with, is going to be a darker color. It's going to say doom in the upper right-hand corner. Now, the other way you know that you want to start with the doom side with all these cards is the fact that the doom side also is going to tell you how to build this location, what kind of cards are going to go into building this location. So if you don't know what kind of cards you need to put in your location, you have the wrong side up. Put the doom side up. It's going to tell you how to start with location. Finish reading the rest of the mission. It's going to tell you how you're going to put together all these decks, all these special locations, and any special rules. For example, the Taking the Plunge mission is a little bit more structured. You actually have to go through these locations in order, which means you have to place them out in order. Again, this is all explained here. Future missions will allow you to start at any location you want and move around at all locations as you want, as the rules allow. But basically, once you have your mission set right here, you can get rid of the storybook. You can put it off to the side. You now should have your true threats. True threats have a black crown on top of an evil bad guy head to know that those are true threats. Regular threats do not have the black crown. The true threats, the nice thing to know about these true threats is you'll notice that the backside has thematic text to remind you that true threats are never put inside the locations. True threats are going to be represented by these cards right here, such as your master cards and your minion cards. And basically these rule cards right here, these structure cards, are going to tell you which master represents which one of the true threats, which minion represents one of the true threats, and as you're playing the game with all these locations, if you flip over a card that happens to be a minion, you're going to look at the structure. It's going to tell you which minion is represented by this card. Or if you happen to flip over a master, the structure is going to tell you which one of these bad guys that master is represented with. And then you're simply going to fight that card, and whether you win or lose, you're going to follow the rules. But either way, you're not going to shuffle these true threats into any of these decks. If you do any shuffling, you're going to shuffle these cards into the decks, because these cards specifically right here are going to be the cards that go into every one of these locations. Your true threats are always kept out, so basically you have an idea of what you're constantly working against, what you're trying to fight, and how you're trying to do all these different things. Once you have your structures, once you have all these different locations put out, you're simply just going to grab a number of cards based on every one of these symbols. That's going to tell you how to build that nexus. For example, and again, read every one of these locations and these structures, because this is going to change up as you go through more difficult missions. But basically, for example, I'm going to take 1 mind card, no body cards, 2 soul cards, no rage cards, 3 regular threats, not true threats, and I'm going to take 2 omens randomly drawn, so maybe omens of hope and maybe omens of doom. I don't know, because I'm going to randomly shuffle the omen deck every time I play. I set up the game, and I don't know which kind of omens are going to be shuffled in. Once I have all those, I'm going to add any minion cards, any master cards I need to add to this deck of cards, and I'm going to shuffle all these cards, and that's going to create that one location. I'm going to do that with every single one of these locations, and once I have all these locations built, I should have a nexus card, and then however you want to build it, you're simply going to have a deck of cards underneath it representing the cards you're going to be exploring at that location. As you're playing cards, you're going to continue to explore these locations, flipping these locations over, and you're going to continue going through until you've accomplished whatever the structure says you need to do to win the game. So for example, using the very first starting mission, I'll give you a rough idea of how the first mission is going to play out. The very first mission is going to play out because you are going to have one master and you're going to have two other minions. Basically 3 minions, but the bad guys are basically 2. And what you're going to do is you're going to take one minion number 1 card, you're going to take one minion number 2 card, and then you're going to take the master card. And then you're going to shuffle all 3 of these together. So you don't know which one is which, and then you're going to put one of these cards in the woods, one of these cards in the precinct, and then one of these cards is going to go into the motel. And then those cards are going to be shuffled with the 8 other cards, so you don't know where exactly that card is located. And then you're going to grab 4 more cards that are going to represent minions, that are going to represent the bystanders. They're going to shuffle into the final location, which is going to be the nexus. This nexus, which is going to be the lake. So this lake is eventually going to have 12 cards. These other locations are only going to have 9 cards in them. As you continue to explore these locations, you are either going to encounter a snow angel, you're going to encounter the helpless child, or you're going to encounter the Wendigo, or you're going to eventually run into bystanders, which happen to be in this final location. The way this is going to work, as you're going through closing these locations, the Wendigo is going to keep running away, and eventually he's going to end up in the lake, and he's going to be represented in the lake by his master card. Once you defeat the Wendigo master card in the lake location, that's how you win the first mission. So that gives you a rough overview of how some of these missions play. This is a very simple mission, but again, they start getting much more complex as you continue to play the game. Now, every one of these missions is going to have a structure built into it, which is going to tell you a couple different things. It's going to tell you how to set up the mission. It's going to tell you what each one of the minion cards represent in reference to the true threats, but it's also going to tell you if there is a timer and how to set up the timer. Now, the very first mission is going to be a mission that's based on as the hours pass. And you're going to see this card popping up quite a bit, and basically it represents is a timer. You're going to build a deck of cards, which is going to be your timer. If that timer ever runs out, it does not matter if our saints are still alive or still have cards in their hand, you have lost the mission because you've timed out. If you ever time out a mission, you lose the mission and somebody is going to get a death. It doesn't matter if you don't have any excessive damage on your saints. Timing out a mission is going to cause one of your saints to get a death, and I'll explain that later on in this video, but just understand that there is a timer, so you do have a time pressure to get through all these locations quickly, hunt down the master, and defeat them and win the game. Doesn't matter where that location happens to be, but the challenge is to hunt them down, chase them down, and finally defeat them, whatever the requirements of that mission happens to be. Now, before we go any further, it's really important to understand that Apocrypha is a game that loves its symbols, and it really is a game that loves its lexicon. And it's actually a game that's pretty darn simple to understand how to play. Once you figure out the lexicon and once you figure out the symbols, the challenge of the game is learning those learning those symbols and learning those terms, exactly what they mean, and understanding that the game really is specific when it's mentioning a certain part of the phase, and this game is going to be broken down into rounds. Every round is going to be broken down into phases, but if a card mentions a phase, it can only be played during that phase. So if a card says support, you can only play it during the support phase. If a card says investigate, you can only play it during the investigate phase. If a card says sanctify, you can only play it during the sanctifies phase. If a card says transfer or end, you can only play it during those specific phases. And one more thing on top of that, when a card mentions healing during the end phase, you can only use it to heal at the start of the end phase, right when the end phase starts, even though the end phase itself is broken down into many, many steps, including refilling your hand, discarding cards, and recycling cards. And again, going back to that lexicon, this game does like its lexicon. So I'm just going to go ahead and point it out here and show you that there is a lexicon on the back of the rulebook. Take some time to familiarize yourself with it. I can pretty much do a 30-minute video just on the lexicon itself. It's not going to make the game any easier to understand. It's probably just going to confuse you more than anything. So I'm just going to gently point this out, take a few moments to point it out, and then actually go to the actual structure of the rounds, because I think it's a much better way to learn the game. Because my intentions between this tutorial video and my sample gameplay video, you should be able to go to the store, buy a copy of this game, bring it home, pop open the box, and start playing with your friends, because my hope is that between these two videos, you'll have enough information to get this game to the table. So the first thing to understand is that this game does use a lot of symbols. If you look at this, you're going to see any one of these symbols, and it's going to tell you exactly what that symbol means anytime you see it on a card. So for example, if you see a symbol that's a down pointing arrow, that means it affects you, the saint who's playing. It is you, your turn, it's affecting you. If you see an up arrow, that means it's going to affect any saint who is at your location, one specific saint only, not all the saints, unless there's another symbol. We'll cover that in just a second. If you see the left arrow, that means it's going to affect the saint to your left, and that's the left at the table. So it's very important how you're sitting around the table in this game. If I'm sitting here and I'm Dr. Z's, and the player to my left is Gabriella, any card I play that has a left arrow on it, it's going to affect that player to my left. So it's very important to watch your seating. It's going to be very important when we explain these stats and how they affect the other players, so watch your seating around the table. Again, to the right, it means it's going to affect the player to your right. If it shows all 4 cardinal directions of the compass, that means it's going to affect one person of your choice, either yourself, another person at your table, somebody, or another person at your location, your nexus, a player to your left, or a player to the right. And if there is ever a circle around that symbol, that means it's going to affect everybody who matches that description. So, for example, if you have an up arrow surrounded by a circle, that means it's going to affect every other saint at your nexus. If you're playing a 6-player game and all 6 saints are at the motel working together, and you have an up arrow symbol and a circle around them, that means it's going to affect the other 5 players at the table, because remember, the up arrow is everybody else at your location, not you. If a card happens to have an up arrow, a down arrow, and a circle around it, that means it's everybody at your current location, including you. So understand how that works. And if you ever see a symbol that looks like a star panda, that means it's your specific saint. And of course, you can read the rest of it. It's going to tell you about all the symbols. Same thing for the statistics. And also understand that there is a card cost hierarchy. So if a card has a specific cost, it's going to use a term. Sacrifice means the card is going to be returned to the box. Bury the card means you're going to place it underneath your saint, and it's not going to be given back to you until this specific mission is over. It's still going to be part of your deck, but unlike sacrifice, which means the card goes back in the box, you don't get it back. Next up, we have discard, which basically means when you play the card, if you do something that causes a discard, you're simply going to put it in your discard pile. That's all you're going to do with the card. Next thing up is recycle. Recycle means that you're going to take the card and place it on the bottom of your draw deck. Next thing we have is we're going to have shuffle, which basically means that you're going to shuffle the card back into your draw deck. And then finally, we're going to have reload, which means if a card is in your hand, you have to reload it. You're simply going to place it on top of your draw pile, which means at the end of your turn, you are going to draw that card back in your hand because you're reloading the card. Again, it's a special lexicon. Make sure you realize how this works, what these terms mean, but also realize that you're going to have certain abilities that say raise the cost or lower the cost. And that is being very specific when it comes to this table. If it tells you it's lowering the cost, that means you're going to lower the actual keyword itself on this chart. So for example, if you have a card that says bury this card to do an action, but if you have the hack skill, lower the cost by 1, so you're going to lower the card cost by 1, so lowering the cost by 1 is bury is going to drop down to discard. So you specifically, since you met the criteria for that card, instead of burying that card, you're going to discard it. But let's say you have a card that says discard this card, but if you have the hack skill, raise the cost by 1. That means that you must raise the cost, and now this card for you, since you have the hack skill, if you're playing Dr. Z's, you have the hack skill, that means your cost is now you must bury that card. If you have a card that says bury to play it, and it says raise the cost by 1, now means that you have to sacrifice it because you met certain conditions. So understand this card cost hierarchy is very important. Going down is good, going up is bad. You want to make sure you're playing cards that have the cost go down, because that means it's much easier and cheaper to play those cards. That's just a quick overview of that. Let's go over and explain to you exactly how the game plays. But before we do that, let's go ahead and draw a hand of cards for Dr. Z's. Remember, your hand size right here is how many cards you start with. Every single game, at the end of every single round, you must draw your hand back up to that hand size. And if you're unable to draw your hand up to that hand size, your saint is going to fade. Fading is very bad. That's how you get the deaths, but we'll explain that when we get to that point. We have a hand size of 6. We start with 6 cards. And in this specific mission, we know that we have to play these locations in order. So Dr. Z's gets to start at the motel. All of our locations start doomed side up. Let's go ahead and show you how this game plays. Now, the important thing to understand is after you have everything set up, every single one of the players does start with a hand of cards. And remember, seating around the table is extremely important because remember, you can affect the player to your left, you can affect the player to your right in a 3-player game, but in a 4-player game, the person sitting across from you can't affect, not as well. There's some ways you can do it, but you have limited ways to do that. So it's very important to watch your seating, and it can be very important to watch your seating based on your statistics, because that can help you judge how you want to be sitting around the table. So once every player has had their starting hand of cards, the only thing left to do is decide which person is going to be the starting player. Of course, if you're playing solo, playing with multiple saints, you can pick which saint you want to have go first. Just make sure you remember how your saints are positioned If you're playing solo and playing a 3-player game, make sure you're arranging your saints in a simple way as if you're sitting around a table, because your saints can affect the other saints around the table, but only based on the position. So it's very important how you do that. So once we have our deck of our hand of starting cards for all of our saints, the next thing we are going to do is we're going to see if there's any abilities based on our saints or based on the structures or anything that's going to happen before the mission starts. Now this isn't going to happen until you start getting into later missions, but just understand some missions are going to have things that are going to occur before the very first round of the game. And also understand that your clock structure is going to explain the basic flow of the game. So make sure you pay really close attention to your clock structure. It's going to be your third structure card, and it's going to give you the basic flow of how the game is going to progress, the timer that's going to be built in the game, and explain to you how things are going to go. Also make sure you understand that various different locations may have abilities that are going to trigger during certain phases of the round. And also understand that even though not all phases of every round are actually played, they still occur. It's really important to understand that all these phases do occur. So even if I don't play a card that's going to give me the ability to investigate, the investigate stage still does happen. Why do I say that? Well, that's really important. Let's say you happen to be at a location that says, during the investigate phase, take 1 point of damage. Well, generally speaking, most phases, you're not going to interact those phases unless you specifically play a card that allows you to do something during the investigate phase. So for example, if I have this omen in my hand, you're going to see that allows me to do something during the investigate step. If I don't play this card, I may not do an investigate step, but that doesn't mean the investigate step doesn't still happen. So if I happen to be at a location that says investigate step, take 1 point of damage, even though I didn't play an investigate card, I'm still going to take that 1 point of damage. And again, the game has a nice, easy structure. You have the start, then you have the support, then you have the investigate, then you're going to go to the sanctified step, then you're going to go to the transfer step, and then you're going to go to the end step. And every one of these phases have some individual, little lower, lesser, broken down parts of how that phase is specifically going to work. So it's very, very important. Also, another thing that's really important to understand about this game is just because these phases are done in order, it's not completely done in order every single time, because there's parts of the phases you can actually repeat. The start phase is always going to happen. It's going to happen at the start of every phase, and once you are done with the start phase, whether it happens to be start phase actions from the location you happen to be, start phase actions from the clock, or cards you're going to play during the start phase, or even special powers from your saint that go during the start phase. Once you move through the start phase, you're going to move to the support and the investigate phase. Now, the nice things about the support and the investigate phase is that they are not only interchangeable, you can keep doing them over and over and over and over again as long as you're willing to keep playing cards. So if I happen to have a hand of cards, and in my hand of cards I happen to have an ability that allows me to do an initiate, I can play that card for its initiate power. Then I can look at my hand of cards and I can play one that allows me to do a support power. And then I can play another card that allows me to do something during the initiate phase. And then I can do another card that'll be an initiate phase. And then I look at my hand of cards and go, hey, there's a support card. And I can keep doing that as long as I have cards that I want to keep playing until I go to the sanctify step, until I go to the transfer step, or I go to the end step. Once I start any of those other steps, I cannot go back to the investigate or the sanctify step anymore. So I can keep repeating investigate. I can keep repeating the support step as much and as often as I have the cards to do it. But once I stop doing those, once I move to sanctify, you can't back up anymore. You must continue the round structure by following the exact round structure. Once I go to sanctify, once I go to transfer, once I go to end, you can't back up. So if you skip sanctify and you go to transfer, you can't back up and go to sanctify. If you skip all the way to the end phase, and some cards will throw you all the way to the end phase, you can't back up and do the transfer, you can't back up and do the sanctify. Those phases are gone. You're now stuck in the end phase, and once the end phase is done, your turn is over, and it's time for the next player to your left to start the turn. So that's a really long-winded way of explaining it, but it's really important for you to understand exactly how the structure of these rounds goes. It's very important, and also understand that cards are definitely going to mention parts of the phase, and the cards can only be played during the phase section they specifically mention. If you have a card that allows you to heal and it says you can only do it during the sanctify phase, if you can only do this during the support phase, and you've already started the sanctify phase, you can't play that card anymore until your next turn comes around. So be very careful about that, because you can end up killing your hero because you are not paying attention to the turn structure. So the very first thing we should do before we start the game, and then also pay attention every single round, is see if any cards in play are going to have a start phase section action. So if we look at the clock for the very first mission that we are doing right now, which is taking the plunge, we're going to say that it says during the start phase, flip over the top card of the timer, draw it into our hand if it's an omen. If it's not an omen, we're basically going to interact with that card. And the reason why that's important is because this timer is also going to interact with future missions. Some of them, your timer is actually built out of nexuses, not always out of omens. Sometimes your stack of timer cards will also have threats in it. So make sure you understand that's going to change things up as you play. But looking specifically at taking the polar plunge, you see that it says right here at the start of the mission, you're basically going to flip over the top card. We know it's going to be an omen card. We're simply going to add it into our hand if it's an omen. If it's anything else, we're going to have to interact with it. But also be careful, because you notice that the very first nexus we start with, it also says start recycle one card. So we actually have two things going to happen during the start phase. So we're going to take the card in our hand, and then we're going to have to recycle a card. Now remember, recycle means we look at our hand of cards, pick one of the cards, put it at the bottom of our deck, and then that is going to be it for our start phase, unless there's any other start phase actions, cards we want to play, special abilities we have on our saint, or anything that happens to be following under that phase. Also understand that some of these nexuses, the side that has the doom side and the side that has the hope side, the different abilities are going to be different on both sides. The doom side is usually a little bit more damaging to our heroes. The hope side is usually more beneficial, so we want to keep these locations on hope as long as we can. The challenge is, basically when we play these omens of hope, it's going to allow us to flip our current location to the hope side. Anytime we play an omen of doom, it's going to force us to flip the nexus to the doom side. So that's how we're going to have that structure of the game going. So be very careful about how you're paying attention to that. The cards you play are going to interact with the environment very, very well. Also, as we're continuing to play the game, the basic structure of this game is we're going to play support cards, which will allow us to do interactions, and then we're going to play investigate cards. Investigate cards are the ones that are going to allow us to investigate these nexuses and interact with these cards that are associated with the nexus. These cards may be other things such as additional omens, and anytime you draw an omen card from any nexus, you get to put that omen card in your hand, and then you get to investigate that location again for free. You don't have to play another investigate card. Anytime an investigate reveals an omen, you gain that omen and you get to investigate again without playing more cards, which is going to allow you to gain access to possible threats. It's going to allow you to gain access to possible gifts. It's also going to allow you to encounter the minions and the masters. Again, that's going to allow you to slowly work through the structure of the adventure and complete the adventure. So let's go ahead and back all this up, and let's go ahead and explain to you exactly how all of this is going to work. Let's go through the steps of every single round, break it down very, very easily before I even show you exactly how every one of these steps work, how we're going to do these challenges, how we're going to gain cards, how we're going to defeat all these different things, close down these nexuses, and finally defeat these grand villains. At the start of your turn, again, of course, like I said, we're going to start with the start step. And again, basically the start step is going to be interacted with through our structure and possibly specific nexus that we happen to be at. It's going to tell us anything that may happen during the start phase. If nothing needs to happen during the start phase, which is very rare, but it could possibly potentially happen depending on what's going on in the game, you are going to go over to the support step. Now, the support step always happens, but you have to play a card to do so. And basically during the support step, you're going to play cards that are going to possibly allow you to heal your neighbors, cards that are going to allow you to possibly search locations or different things along those lines. And basically you'll look at your hand of cards and you're going to look for this word support. If a card has the word support on it, you're simply going to play it, do what it tells you to do. Generally that's going to be a cost. So for example, this one says recycle it, and you, the active saint, are going to do exactly what the card tells us to do. So in this specific case, we're going to recycle it, and we're going to do something and give us a benefit. Now remember, if we have any special abilities that are going to change the cost of it, it can make the cost go up or go down. So a recycled card where the cost goes up will go up to discard. The card cost went down, it would go down to shuffle. Remember, shuffle means shuffling back into our draw pile. So also understand that if we play a support card, it allows us to investigate our location. And if we reveal a card, specifically, generally speaking, it's going to be a threat that has a support step. That means it's going to also occur during the support step, and usually that's going to be something bad that's going to happen. Generally speaking, we may play a support card that says, examine your location, examine 1, examine 2, examine 3, and that's how many cards you can examine from the top of the deck. So if I have a location, for example, that says examine 3, I would examine the top 3 cards of the deck, and I'd follow what the rest of the deck card does. Sometimes it's going to allow me to change the order of these cards. Sometimes it's going to tell me to do other things, but if any of those cards I reveal during that examine have a support step on them and it's a threat, it's basically going to do something like support, make a body 12 check as just a random example, or take 2 points of damage from finding this threat inside the deck. And if you're going to do so, you're going to figure out what your body is, you're going to roll that many dice, and you're going to try to defeat that difficulty number. If you do, you equal to or higher, nothing happens to you. If you go less, you're going to have to do what that card tells you to do, and then that card's going to go right back on the top of the deck. So once you go through the support step, the next thing you're going to do is the investigate step. Now, the investigate step is, generally speaking, the most average way, most of the time, that you're going to be interacting with every single one of these locations. And the way you're going to investigate is you're going to play cards that allow you to investigate. The major way you're going to do that is going to be Omens of Hope and Omens of Doom. Now, that is not the only way to do so. There are special powers and everything along those lines. Some heroes have special abilities allow them to do extra investigates if they will and discard cards and everything. I'm not going to cover all those powers. They should be pretty self-explanatory in every one of our heroes. But basically, we're going to play these cards, and they're going to tell you investigate, sacrifice this card. Remember, sacrifice removes it from the game, putting it back in the box, and then go ahead and investigate your location. Investigate means to flip the top card over from that location, and if that location happens to be a gift, we're going to try to gain that gift. And then we'll take that gift into our hand. If that top card that we draw happens to be a threat, then we will have to try to defeat that threat. Now, the interesting thing about this game is if we ever encounter a threat and we defeat it, we're going to sacrifice it, which means it's going to go back in the box. If we fail to defeat this threat, it's going to be shuffled back into the deck from where it came from. Whereas opposed to a gift, if we succeed in gaining a gift, the gift is going to go directly into our hand. If we fail at gaining the gift is going to be sacrificed, removed from the game, and put back in the box. So generally speaking, if you gain gifts, they go to your hand. If you defeat threats, they go back to the box. So you want to be gaining gifts, defeating threats, and continue to go on. Because the most important thing about this game is at the end of every single round, you need to refill your hand back up to your hand size. You have to do that. And if you don't have enough cards to draw from your hand, your saint is going to fade. Fading is very dangerous. That means your saint is getting very close to taking a death. Remember, 9 deaths, your saint is removed from the game, from the campaign permanently. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. So let's go ahead and look at a couple different ways that we can have an encounter. We'll go ahead and encounter a threat encounter, and then we will go ahead and encounter a gift encounter to show you exactly how this is going to work. The very first thing you're going to do when you reveal a card, and let's just say we only revealed one of these cards. I'm just going to place both of them up so I can explain both the ways to do this here really quickly. Understand you're generally only going to investigate one card, but 2 of them up just to explain how this works. The very first thing you're going to do is when you reveal a card from an investigate step, you are going to encounter that card, or you're going to decide to avoid that card. Now, you can only avoid a card if you have a card in your hand that allows you to avoid. If you do, you're going to play it, do what it says, and then you're going to avoid the card. Generally speaking, when you avoid a card, it's going to be shuffled right back into the same location. If you're not avoiding a card, you have to confront it unless you have a special ability that allows you to do it. Now, some heroes have the ability to move away from location, so it can possibly happen. So if you are going to go for a card, we need to break down the structure on how we need to overcome these obstacles to gain these cards into our hands or to defeat these threats. So the first thing you want to do is read every one of these cards every time you encounter them, because sometimes these cards are going to make things happen once they're revealed. For example, there are some threats that say investigate on them. That means that if you reveal them during the investigate step, because remember, we're still in that investigate step going on right now, but if you reveal them during the investigate step, then that investigate power is going to go off and you're going to have to do what it says. Some are also going to give you extra challenges and say before you can even confront it, you need to succeed in a certain check. If you fail to succeed in that check, something's going to happen. Again, read the text of the card. They should be pretty self-explanatory and tell you exactly how you need to go ahead and get to the point where we're going to try to confront these cards and overcome them. Also note that some of our heroes also have powers that may activate before we go fully into the initiate step and go into trying to confront these cards. So make sure you're reading every one of your saints. Again, I don't want to cover all these saints because that's going to make this video boringly, stupidly long, and that's what I'm trying to avoid here. Again, this game can be a little bit complex. I'm trying to make it as easy to understand as possible. So I'm just trying to give you a really good overview. I don't want to cover everything exactly, just let you know that there are things that are going to break some of the rules from what I'm describing here. So after you decide that you are going to go ahead and confront one of these cards, whether it happens to be a gift or a threat, you need to figure out exactly which statistic you're going to try to overcome to gain that card. Now, every one of these cards is going to have 2 3, sometimes 4 statistics on it. Generally speaking, you're only going to pick one of those statistics to overcome. Some of these cards are going to make you overcome 2 of the statistics. Some of them are going to make you overcome all 4 of the statistics, and it's going to tell you what's going to happen if you fail to overcome any of them. Again, read the cards and generally tell you what you need to do. But generally what you're going to do is you're going to look at the target number on every one of the statistics, and that's what you need to roll equal to or greater after you resolve the card by rolling a certain amount of dice. Now remember, when you resolve, you only get to keep 3 dice from the total that you are going to resolve. Even though you may roll more than 3 dice, you may roll up to 8 dice, but you are only going to keep 3 dice to figure out if you manage to defeat that target number. So if you roll really, really terribly, even if you happen to roll 8 dice, it is possible with 8 dice to roll really, really terrible and still not manage to overcome these cards, because you need to pick the 3 highest dice, and if you just don't roll well enough, you're not going to do it. So the first thing you need to do is you need to look at your character, look at your statistics, and figure out which one of these numbers you have the greatest chance of succeeding against. So we're going to use Dr. Z's as our victim here, and I use the term victim very loosely because we are going to use him as our hero who's going to overcome both of these challenges and show you exactly how difficult and how we need to plan to overcome every one of these challenges. So once we've revealed, the first thing we need to do is we need to decide which one of these target numbers we're going to go for. So let's go ahead and start with the threat. We see that this threat has a target number of 14 body or 11 rage. Well, we see that our statistic in body is 2. Our statistic in rage is also 2. That means if we are going to go after the rage challenge, we are going to roll 2 dice only because that's our stat. If we decide to go after the body target number, again, our stat is only 2, so that means we are only going to roll 2 dice. Well, mathematically, we can see that if you're rolling 6-sided dice, it's impossible to roll a 14 or higher. It is possible to roll an 11 or higher, so most likely we're going to go for rage. But this is what you also got to look at. There's different things based on the cards you have in your hand, skills that our heroes happen to have, and special abilities our heroes have that are going to allow us to add more dice to these rolls, so it's not always as cut and dry as it may appear right on the surface. So after we pick the virtue that we are going to confront, we are pretty much locked in with that virtue, barring cards that we are going to play. Once we pick the virtue that we are going to confront, we need to move on to the next step, which is going to ask for another hero on the table who can help us for assistance. Now, the interesting thing about this game is, remember, the position of your statistics judges the amount of assistance you can give. So your statistic on the bottom, you can always use to assist yourself. The statistic or the virtue on your left allows you to help the saint to your left. The virtue on your right allows you to help the saint to your right. And the virtue on top allows you to help any saint at your current location. Now, the cool thing is, if you're playing solo, is you can always assist yourself with any of your statistics because you're always able to help yourself. You're always at your own location. You're always to your own left, and you're always to your own right. So playing solo is not impossible. You can use any one of these statistics for helping, but you need to watch it when you're playing with multiple players, because if you're playing a 4-player game, the person across the table from you can't help you at all unless they happen to be at your same location. And the way this is going to work is, let's go ahead and bring Gabriella into the game just to show you how we can work on assisting with the 2-player game. So let's say we happen to have Gabriella in the game with us, and she happens to be at the woods. Yes, I'm breaking the rules for this mission because we can't be in the woods yet, but work with me. I'm trying to teach you how to play this game here. So if we're playing a 2-player game, Gabriella is at a different nexus from us. That means she cannot assist us with her top statistic. She can assist us with her left statistic, and she can assist us with her right statistic if she wanted to. So she can assist us with any soul check. She can assist us with any body check. If she happened to be at our current location, though, that means she could assist us with body, she could assist us with soul, and she can assist us with rage. And what does assistance mean? Well, that will allow a current active saint to reroll that many dice. Now, you can't add that many dice, but you can definitely reroll up to that many dice. So let's say, for example, that we decided to go after these snakes right here. We decided to do a rage check, and I haven't gotten to the skills yet, but that means I get to roll 2 dice. Let's say I ask Gabriella for assistance. She has a rage stat of 3. That means she's going to allow us to reroll up to 3 dice. So when we go after this, we would need 11 or better. Let's say we got that 6 and that 3, which equals 9. Well, we can reroll up to 3 of our dice, so we'll pick this one to reroll, and we'll reroll it. And let's say we happen to get a 6 on the second reroll. Well, hey, we would win, and we would manage to defeat that. So that's why assisting is very nice. Here's the negative about assisting. Anytime you assist, gain assistance, or anybody assists another saint by using the assist powers and the assist rules, the encounter is going to mutate. Mutating means you are going to take one of these cards right here, and something is going to make this encounter much more challenging. Now, I house rule this because I think it's silly to shuffle 5 cards all the time. But basically the way the rules say is you're going to take these 5 cards, randomly shuffle them, and you're going to reveal one, and then you're either going to take the mutation side for a threat, or you're going to take the mutation side if it's anything that is not a threat. These are double-sided cards, so if you're going against a threat, you're going to use a threat mutation side. If you're going to go against a gift, you're going to use the gift mutation side. And for every single person who is assisting you, you are going to roll 1 die on the card based on whichever card you choose. So using my house rule, I roll a 10-sider, and if I roll a 10, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So let's just say in this example, we happen to get swarming. If you want to follow the rules, you shuffle all 5 of these cards, and let's say we got swarming as a card we chose. So if we are going to gain assistance from 1 saint, we're going to roll once on this table. If multiple saints are assisting us, we're going to roll multiple dice for every single saint total. Plus, also understand some of these cards are also going to tell you to mutate an encounter, even if you're not gaining any assistance. So let's say we are playing a 3-saint game. Let's say this card told us to mutate right here, and add a mutated 1. So since it's a mutated 1, we're going to roll once on the swarming table. If I'm assisting myself, we're going to roll 1 more. Let's say Gabriella is also assisting us. We're going to roll 1 more. Let's say there's another saint in the fight who is also going to assist us. We are going to roll all these dice, and we are going to take the lowest roll. Understand, every one of these mutation cards, the lower you roll, the worse. Generally, 5 or 6 is generally safe. 1, 2, or 3 is generally really, really bad. So you're going to take all these dice, and you're going to take the lowest roll. In this example, if I rolled a 4, we'd read the full result and do exactly what the 4 said. If I only had 1 mutate, I would still only roll 1 die, and I'd have to take that result. If we had 3 mutates, roll the 3 dice, and again, we're going to take the lowest roll, and I am going to keep these dice for next time I play Apocrypha, because those are magical dice. I did not realize that until just now, how magical those dice are. So, after we have done the targeting virtue, after we've asked for assistance, and after we've gained assistance from the other players, managed to mutate the encounter and figure out what the mutation is going to do, now we're going to do what's called the step where we are going to start gathering our dice, start playing our cards, and try to influence the results, and also check the skills, which is a really, really important thing, because skills make these encounters easier. So back to our encounter with the snakes, taking this in order. Now we are in the assemble step of this encounter with these snakes. So we have decided that we are going to make this we are going to go after the rage virtue. We have Gabriella at our location. She has decided to assist us, which means she is going to allow us to re-roll 3 of the dice. Also note that we're running into a swarming, which is number 4, which is what I rolled, which says all other saints at this location must confront a copy of the threat. So we'll cover this right now because it's very important to understand. Understand a card can never copy itself, so a copy can never create another copy. But a normal card can copy, and understand anytime a game tells you to draw a new card, you're going to pull it out of the box, and whatever card you pull out of the box, after you confront it, it goes back into the box unless something tells you to do something otherwise. So let's take this assemble step nice and slow, because this is pretty much the most important and the biggest way you're going to interact with the game. So remember, I picked rage as my virtue, so my rage is the dice I'm going to be using, rage is the statistic I'm going to be using, and rage is the difficulty number I'm going to be going after. So my difficulty number is 11, and I'm using rage. So I'm going to look at my rage statistic, which is going to tell me how many rage dice I get. Now, one thing I haven't covered yet, but you need to understand, this game has 4 dice of every single color for a reason. You can never roll more than 4 dice of a specific statistic ever at any time in the game. If anything ever gives you more dice of that specific statistic or that specific virtue, you're going to start using the white dice, because the white dice are considered bonus dice. What this means in the grand scheme of things is, generally speaking, you're never going to roll more than 8 dice. Now, there are some cards that are going to break the rules, so make sure you understand this is a rarity. But generally speaking, the most amount of dice you ever roll is 4 statistic dice and up to 4 bonus dice. Now, the nice thing about this game is, let's say you happen to have a statistic that has a statistic of 4, such as Dr. Z's, who does have a 4 mind. Let's say let's kind of segue here. let's just go on a little side tangent just for a second. Let's say I'm doing a mind check. I have 4 mind dice. If I play a card that says add 1 bonus mind die, instead of actually grabbing another mind die, because there's no more mind dice left in the game, I need to draw one of the bonus dice. So if I happen to play a card that says add 3 bonus dice, plus add another mind die, I am at the limits of the amount of dice I can add to my check. So even if I start playing more cards, let's say add more mind dice, I've used up all my bonus dice, I've used up all my mind dice, I can't add any more. But do understand there are some cards, like there's a card that actually allows you to add a body die to a check, even if it's not a body check. So if you play that card, you can get up to 9 dice, it's possible. But even looking at all this stuff, remember, the most amount of dice you're ever going to keep from a check is 3. So don't think that things are going to get super easy. This isn't like the Pathfinder Adventure Card Game where you're going to start stacking up tons of cards and tons of dice to make sure you win. Because you're basically just hedging your bets in this game to have a potential for better rolls. You're not going to keep trunking in or keep adding in all those dice to get one grand number of like 50 to defeat something. You're just going to take the 3 best dice. But let's stop getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to our check here. So we are using rage. We have a rage stat of 2, which means we have 2 dice. But here's the cool thing. If you ever have a skill on the card you're going after that happens to match one of the skills of your saint, you're going to gain that many bonus dice. So let's looking over here, we're going to see that the snakes have a skill of resist. If I look over here, we see that Dr. Z's has a resist of 1. Aha, I could add 1 bonus die because my skill matches. Also, do note that if you have multiple skills that match, you're not going to match all the skills, you're going to match the best one. Because you see that Dr. Z's has a steady of 2 and a resist of 1 and a hack of 1. If I was going against an encounter that had hack, resist, and study, I'm not going to roll 4 bonus dice. I'm going to pick the best of those, which is study 2, which would allow me to add 2 bonus dice. Pick the best one. Also note that if you have cards in your hand, and all these cards in your hand also have skills on them, if I happen to play a card from my hand that has a skill that matches my hero's skill, I can take that skill instead if that's better for my hero. So if I were to play the Monsterpedia card, it does have a study of 2, so if I can manage to play this card during this encounter, I can't in this case, but in case I could, well, actually I guess there is ways I could do it, but let's not make this too complex. But if I play this card, I would get a study of 2, which give me 2 bonus dice. So remember, if the card you play or the card you're encountering has a keyword that matches one of your skills, you get to add that many bonus dice to your check. So you see that our chances of succeeding at this are already starting to get better. We're already at 3 dice. Now that we've assembled our dice based on our skills, based on the stat we're choosing, we're going to look at our hand of cards and see if we have any cards in our hand that are going to allow us to play extra cards. By Jove, I do. Oh my gosh, it's almost like I planned this. Actually, not really, I randomly shuffled this, so it's kind of cool this example is going to work out. So we see that we have extra razor blades in our hand. This one says discard this to boost rage. Now in every single encounter, you're allowed to boost once only. So even if you have lots of boost cards in your hand, say boost, 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 you can only play one of them. You can't play multiple. So if I had multiple red cards that each allow me a boost, I got to pick the one I want to play. Which means you need to pick what you want to use this card for, because I could boost 1 or I could sacrifice to add 2, which could be something I need to decide. But I'm just going to discard this card for the boost 1, which will allow me to add 1 rage die. Look at that. I'm already up to 4 dice, and all I need to roll is an 11 or better, and I get to keep 3 of them. Odds are already starting to go in my favor here. So we can also continue to look at cards in our hand that have special things. We can also look at special powers, such as the fact that Gabriella has a special ability that she can add 1 to her total roll, which gives her special abilities. So you're going to see there's different ways to increase our total dice, our total values, so it's not always a foregone conclusion of what we want to target, what we want to use. Maybe sometimes we want to pick the lower statistic because we can add better dice to increase our odds of winning. Now here's where it gets a little complex, and it's probably not going to make sense how I explain this to you, and don't worry, you probably won't encounter this in any of the first early missions. But understand, as you're playing through these, going through all these virtues, if you play a power that changes the target virtue to something different or to a different virtue, you get to actually use dice that match the new virtue instead, and the target number actually gets to remain the same. So playing smartly, you can actually continue to manipulate these and even start using your powerful cards, which are going to allow you to start rolling more dice. So understand the interaction of how you play these cards, the order you play these cards, and all these things can really make a huge difference. And even against terrible odds, where you only have 2 dice, turn defeat into potential victory. So make sure you're watching that. It can be very important on how you're playing the order of the cards, what order of these cards you're playing, how you're assisting the other heroes, and how you are using all of your special abilities can make a huge difference. So continuing our example here, after we have all the things that we need to do, and after we manage to boost our virtue to see what kind of things we're going to do for the boosting, and if we see if we're going to change anything, that is when we are going to finally actually officially gather all of our dice. So from everything I played, from the boosting, from the skill matching, and from all the other things I've managed to do in this example, I managed to gain 4 dice. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll the 4 dice, and when I roll the 4 dice, I now get to go through the evaluate step. So rolling dice is part of the evaluate step, so let's go ahead and roll these dice and see exactly what we get. So before we do anything at all, we see that I've actually already defeated this creature, but let's not jump ahead of ourselves, because remember, we need to do this evaluate step in a very specific order. And the way this is basically going to work is we are going to roll the dice. After we roll the dice, we may re-roll any dice, explode dice, upgrade dice, downgrade dice, flip dice, or maybe even trash dice. And trashing means that we are going to take the dice and we are going to remove them from our total, so we have to be very careful about that. But backing up, remember how we had Gabriella help us? She assisted us by using her rage. Her rage was a 3. That allows us to re-roll up to 3 dice. So I could re-roll up to 3. I've already won with these dice, but let's just go ahead and go for broke and see if we can really push our luck here. Why? Because, you know, it's nice to roll bad and fail, because then I can show you better examples. So that would be re-rolling. Let's say I happen to have a card in my hand that allow me to flip a die to its other side. I could play that card, discard it, and flip that 1 to a 6. Oops, nope, I don't have bones. I thought I had lucky bones, oh well. But there are cards that will allow you to do that. There are going to be cards that allow you to trash the lowest die, cards that are going to allow you to explode. Explode means that if you roll, for example, it says explode 1, that means if I roll a 1, I get to pick up another die and roll it, and that can also show you as another 1 to show you how wonderfully I can roll. But basically, that is what we're going to do. And once we are done with all the steps of roll, re-roll, explode, flip, trash, all those different things, we are going to pick the 3 highest dice from our total, possibly up to 4 if we play some very powerful cards. And then all we need to do is see if we roll that number or higher. If we did, we've managed to overcome the encounter. If it was a threat, it's sacrificed back into the box. If it's a gift, it's going to go into our hand. But if we rolled less than their target number, if it's a gift, we sacrifice it, goes back in the box. If it happened to be a threat, we are going to shuffle it back into the location it came from, and our investigate step is wasted. But our turn isn't over, because remember, if we haven't gone out of the investigate step, we can still do another investigate if we happen to have a card that allows us to do it. We can play a support card, and again, as long as we keep playing support and investigate cards, we don't need to end our turn. We can keep going unless the card specifically says that we need to do something else. And trust me when I say some of these cards will say things such as, if you fail versus this encounter, go to end. Now end, remember, is part of the steps. So that means you are going to bypass sanctify, you're going to bypass transfer. You're going to go directly to end and do the end step. You can't back up, you can't do anything more. Your turn is pretty much over. So follow the words on the cards. Remember that specific words on cards are cost, they are steps, and they're also how things are going to occur. So now that we've explained the support step, now that we've explained the investigate step, let's go ahead and explain the sanctify step. And this is the most important step to understand. You can only do the sanctify step if something gives you the power to do the sanctify step. If you don't have an ability due to a structure card, or if you don't have something telling you that you can go to the sanctify step, you skip the sanctify step and pretend it doesn't happen. Now the sanctify step is really interesting, and it's probably one of the more complex things in this game, because the way the sanctify step is going to work out is different based on if you're fighting a master or if you happen to be fighting a minion. So the way this is going to work is, let's go ahead and hunt down our master, who I think was in this deck. Yes, he was. So there's our master, and let's go ahead and show one of our minions here. If we were at a location where we encountered a minion and we defeated the minion, and defeat that minion allowed us to go to the sanctify step, we are going to go to the third part of the sanctify step, which allows us to close the location. Now to close the location, we need to read our specific nexus and see what it says to seal. If we can do what it says to seal, then we can seal the location. And sealing the location means that location is closed, it's removed from the current mission, and any cards left over in that current location are also removed from the game. That means threats and gifts can also be removed. So you need to judge if it's too early to remove that deck from the game. Maybe there's some gifts in there that you really need, or maybe your timer's running short and you need to get rid of that location. But just understand you have to meet the requirements of whatever it says to seal at the bottom of this card. If you can't seal this location, then you cannot do it, and the location is going to stay open even if you defeated the minion at that location. The good news though is that if you ever remove the last card from a location, you get to go to the Sanctify step, and you get to do the Sanctify step for free. You don't have to meet the seal requirements for this location. You automatically close the location, you get to go move to the transfer step and then the end step for your turn. I'll explain how that works in just a minute. I told you it's going to get a little complicated. Stick with me, it's all going to make sense here really quickly. That's specifically for minions. Masters are a little bit more complex. And to explain how the masters work, we're going to separate our heroes a little bit, and we're actually going to show one of our locations that's going to be on a hope side, just to make this make a little bit more sense for you for how this is going to work. So if you encounter a master and you defeat the master and you are allowed to go to the Sanctify step, the first thing you are going to do for the Sanctify step is you are going to get any one of your saints who are currently at a hope location, and a hope location only can guard that location. Now, why would you want to guard a location? Because when a master is defeated, he is going to flee to any location that is not currently sealed. Now, when you defeat a master, the location you are currently at is sealed. Defeating a master or having a location completely empty allows you to seal the location immediately without meeting the requirements at the bottom of the location. But you can help control where they're going to flee to as if you have any of these hope locations and manage to guard them, which means you are temporarily going to close that location and prevent them from fleeing to that location. Now, the way this is generally going to work is if you are fighting a master and you manage to defeat him, all the other players at Hope Nexuses get the chance to guard that location. If they succeed at guarding that location, the master can't go to that location. And then the master is going to flee to one of the other locations. The way that's going to work is you're going to shuffle this master up with an omen card. You're going to randomly take an omen card, shuffle it up, and then you're randomly going to place him at one of those other locations and shuffle them together, and you don't know which one he's going to be at. If you fail at defeating a master, he is also going to flee, but when he flees, he's going to be shuffling in with a threat or possibly something else depending on the rules of a specific location. Again, you're going to shuffle it, and he's randomly going to go to one of the other locations. If you have a location that's hope side up and your saint fails to guard it, that's now going to be a possible location where that master can run. So if we fail to guard this location, we now have 3 different locations the master can run to. So if we beat him, we're going to shuffle in with 2 random omens, and then he's going to go to one of those locations. Or we're going to shuffle with 2 random threats, and again, he's going to go to one of those other random locations. After that, our location will be sealed. Now, the other thing you need to understand about, though, is that if a master flees from a location, you still have to go through your current location and make sure there's no other masters in your other current location. There are still any other masters in your current location. Your location is not closed. You're still going to discard the rest of these cards, but the other master is going to remain at this location. The location is going to remain open, and now you still need to defeat that secondary master. Told you this is a little bit complex, but it starts making sense as you play the game. So really what you're trying to do is you're trying to seal these locations and chase down the master and eventually make it so he has no places left to go. Once he has no places left to go, once you're at the very last location, if all the other locations have been sealed and he's stuck with no place left to go, when you finally defeat him at the last location, he has no place left to go and he is finally sacrificed and he is removed from the game, and generally that's how you're going to start winning those later missions. And that's actually how you're going to win the Wendigo mission, by defeating him at the very last location when he has no locations left to run to. So the Sanctify step is actually broken down in pretty much 3 simple steps that you're going to play in a very specific order. The very first part of the Sanctify step is the guard step. Then you're going to do the escape step, and then you're going to do the seal step. If it's versus a master, if there's no master in the current location you're sanctifying, you're basically going to bypass the guard step, bypass the escape step, and move directly to the seal step. Now is a really good chance to start talking about how our saints can start taking damage. Now, our saints, generally speaking, are going to take damage either during this step versus the masters. Some things will happen here, especially when it comes to sealing these locations, and some of these locations require you to take damage to seal them. Also, another way we're going to take damage is by failing encounters versus threats. Remember that encounter versus the snake where I actually rolled really terribly and got those ones? Well, anytime you fail an encounter to try to defeat something, you're going to take a point of damage for every point that you failed to make the roll by. So for example, if you need to roll an 11 or better to succeed versus a threat, and if you roll a 10, you're going to take 1 point of damage. If you roll a 4, that would be 7 points of damage. Now, generally speaking, you're only going to take damage versus threats, but there are some missions that specify that when you take damage, you're also going to take damage versus gifts when you fail to gain the gifts. So those missions can be very, very challenging. Generally speaking, gifts won't hurt you if you fail to gain them. The only thing that happens is they're sacrificed, put back in the box. Threats are the ones that are a really big challenge. The threats, the minions, and the masters. If you fail to overcome them, you're going to take a point of damage for every point that you miss the target number by. Now, the way the damage is going to work is, generally speaking, you're going to take damage based on the virtue you are trying to overcome. So if you're trying to take a rage virtue to defeat an encounter using rage, if you fail, you're going to take points of damage based on your rage. If you're doing a mind encounter and you fail, you're going to start taking mind points of damage. And that can be very important because damage is going to come out of your current hand of cards, not your draw pile. It's going to come out of your current hand of cards, which does mean that there's a maximum amount of damage you can ever take on your turn. And the way this is going to work is if you have cards in your hand and you take damage, first thing you are going to do is you are going to look for cards in your hand that match the virtue you're taking damage for. So going against that snake that I went against with rage, if I lost versus that snake by 2, I would take 2 points of rage damage. So I'd look at my hand and I'd start looking for 2 rage cards. If I have any rage cards, I must discard 1 rage card for every point of rage damage I took. If that covers all my damage, I'm fine, I'm good to go, I can continue with my turn. But if there's still damage left over to take, or if I don't have any rage cards in my hand, then I must start taking cards randomly out of my hand. You can do this easily just by shuffling your hand and discarding cards, or having another player to your left or to your right start drawing cards randomly out of your hand. So generally speaking, the most amount of damage you can ever take on your turn is pretty much going to be your hand size. So if you ever really, really terribly roll and fail to defeat something by 10 or something like that, if you only have 4 cards in your hand, you're still going to take all 4 of those cards, and all damage as your hand is going to go into your discard pile. So again, the important thing to understand with damage is going to be based on the virtue you're going against. If you have any cards that match that virtue, you pick the cards matching the virtue, which means that if I take 1 rage damage and I have 3 rage cards in my hand, I get to pick the rage card to lose. But if I have this whole nice hand of cards and I take 5 points of body damage, or let's just say 3 points of body damage, you look at my hand, see that I have no body cards in my hand, so I must randomly discard 3 cards from my hand to represent the 3 points of body damage that's going to go into my discard pile. That's pretty much how damage works. That's damage that's going to happen from nexuses. That's damage that's going to happen from minions, from the masters, from the grand threats, from the regular threats, and sometimes even occasionally you're going to take damage from the gifts based on the rules of some of these structures and some of these missions. After the Sanctify step is done, again, if the Sanctify step is going to happen, we get to move to the Transfer step. Now, during the transfer step, the very first thing we are going to do is you may move to another location. Here's the very important thing, though, is if you are at a nexus that was just closed, you and every single saint at the location has to move at this point. So that does mean that sometimes you'll be forced to move when it's not your turn. Because if I have these 2 saints in play right now, and they happen to be at this location, this nexus right here, and we manage to seal it, during the transfer step, both of these saints, even though it happens to be Dr. Z's turn, both these saints are going to move, and they can move following the rules of the structure. Some eventuals will say that we just have to move to the next nexus in line, or each one of our saints can independently choose to go to other locations. But if the location doesn't exist no more, both of our saints have to move. If the location still happens to exist, though, their active saint may move to another location if they want. If they decide that they don't want to move to another location, they are free to look at their hand of cards and pick one of the cards in their hand to give to another saint at their current location. This can be very valuable to our players as we move these cards around the table to help us overcome some of these challenges. If you don't want to move and you don't want to transfer any cards, you are going to move to the end step. Now, the end step is where we start cycling down the end of our round and start getting ready for the next player in turn order to go. The very first thing we need to do during the end phase is we need to start handling our hand and adjusting exactly what kind of cards we have, and we're going to start resetting our hand. But before that happens, at the very start of the end phase, if there's any cards in play that allow healing during the end phase, they're going to happen right now before you start manipulating your hand of cards in your hand, drawing from your discard pile, and all those other things. Healing is going to happen first, and that's very important. That can actually influence how everything else is going to go. So you can't really abuse the system, because it would be really nice if you can do healing at the end of the end phase. Unfortunately, healing is the very first thing that happens during the end phase. Remember, it's very important that you have to play it in that order. Otherwise, you're cheating. After you move through the healing part of the end phase, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your hand of cards and you're going to decide if you want to discard any cards in your hand. Sometimes you may want to do this, especially if you have a whole bunch of cards in your hand that are not helping you overcome some of your encounters. But remember, be very, very careful, because if you can't draw any cards back in your hand and fill up your hand side, your saint is going to fade. If you decide that you don't want to discard any cards in your hand, or if you have more cards in your hand currently than your current hand size, then you're going to have to do something else. But let's take this in order right here first. So let's just say that we don't want to discard any cards and we do not have our current hand size. We are simply going to draw up to our hand size. For this example, Dr. Z's has a hand of 6. We will take our hand up to 6 cards, and then our turn is over. We'll move over to the next saint. Let's say we happen to have 8 cards in our hand, though, which means we have too many cards in our hand and we don't want to discard any. If this is the case, you cannot end your turn with more than your hand size. So you're going to pick as many cards as it takes to get down to your hand size, and you're going to recycle those extra cards. And remember, recycle means those cards go to the bottom of your draw deck. So at the end of your turn, you will always have exactly 6 cards in your hand, or your specific hand size. Once that's done, your turn is over, and we can next move to the next saint in order and continue the gameplay. So that is a rough way the game is going to play. That's a rough turn overview. There's just a couple things I need to explain to you, and then you should have enough information between this video and my sample gameplay video to understand exactly how to play the Apocrypha Adventure Card Game. The first thing to cover really quick is the mission end. Now, missions are going to end in pretty much one of 3 different ways. The first way it's going to end out is mission timing out, and generally that's going to happen is if you happen to have a clock structure and you have no cards left in your clock. If that ever happens, the mission is going to time out, and our saints are all going to have to suffer the consequences of running out of time. The other way a mission is going to end is you reach the mission victory condition, and then the mission is immediately going to end, or if you happen to meet the mission fail condition, and again the mission is going to immediately end. If the mission is a success and our heroes complete it, you are going to go to the victory part, and then all of our players are going to go get the chance to adjust their decks of cards. I'll cover how that works in just a few moments here. Let's just back things up here. If our mission is ever timed out, then that means all of our saints are going to fade, and that does again happen when the clock runs out. And you have to be very careful when we fade, because when we fade, we are potentially going to start having some extra challenges. And basically the way this is going to work is when we fade, one saint is going to be required to take a death and slot that on their card. Now we can pick among all of our different saints, because we want to be very careful about this, because if one saint ever gets their 9th death, they are going to be permanently removed from the game. But if we run out of time, one of the current active saints needs to take a death card and slot that on their halo. Now, if our heroes manage to win the mission, we are going to get the chance to gain some extra fragments, and we're going to get these fragments, and we're going to add these fragments to our heroes. And the way this is going to work is we are going to take the current mission structure. Whoever won the mission is going to get the first chance to decide what kind of fragments they are going to gain onto their hero. So we're going to flip over the mission structure, which will be one of the fragments we are going to gain, possibly, and then we're going to draw bonus fleeting fragments equal to the number of players. So if we're playing 3-player game, we're going to draw 3 fleeting fragments from the box, which will give us a total of 4 fleeting fragments. Then whoever allowed the saints to win the mission is going to look at all the fleeting fragments that are available. They're going to pick one and add it to their halo. And then the next player in player order is going to also pick one, and we're going to continue going around, and then after that's done, we're going to have 1 fleeting fragment, which is not picked by any player, which is going to go back into the box. And then remember, you are going to use these fleeting fragments or possibly start gaining enduring fragments, which is going to increase the strength of every one of our saints. After we are done doing that, every one of our saints needs to rebuild their deck. The first thing we need to do to rebuild our deck is we need to go through it and find any omens that happen to be in our deck, and then we are going to remove them from our deck, which should bring us down to our hand of cards minus omens. Then we need to go through our hand of cards, and we need to rebuild our deck based on the stats of our saint. And then we will keep cards based on our stats. So we will be able to keep, for example, with Dr. C's, I will look at all my cards in my hand, my draw pile, my discard pile, and I will keep 2 rage cards, 2 body cards, 4 mind cards, and 3 soul cards. Any extra cards are going to go to a community pile in the center of the table where all the players can use those to exchange cards. For example, if I have a card that I really can't use, but another player can use, I can simply put it in the community pile and they can switch it out. And then pretty much all of our heroes are going to end up with 11 cards, their hero card, and any managed fragments they manage to gain. And then that hero is now ready for the next mission to begin. Now, if a Saint doesn't have enough cards to rebuild their deck and there are not enough cards in the community pool for all the players to pick from, then you're going to go to the box and you're going to randomly pick one of the alpha gift cards. Remember, the alpha card is the one that has that little symbol in the upper right hand corner. You're going to randomly pick one of those and you're going to pick enough of those to rebuild your deck based on your stats. So for example, if I happen to be playing Dr. Z's and at the end of the game I do not have any mind cards in my hand at all because of basically the way I played, I burned through my mind cards and I don't have any left. We see that Dr. Z's has a mind stat of 4. That means I need to go through the box and randomly pick 4 brand new alpha mind gifts to add into my HUD to make sure I have 11 cards again to start up and be able to play Dr. Z's in the next mission. So I kind of glossed over a couple things. Let's go ahead and backtrack because I'm assuming you won the mission. What happens if you lose the mission, or even worse, what happens if a Saint can't draw any cards because their draw pile is completely empty? Well, if a Saint is ever at the point where they cannot draw any cards from their draw pile, that Saint is now described as fading. They're going to take a death card, and that death card is going to be put in a place where they had their draw pile before. That Saint can keep playing with the amount of cards they have in their hand and keep playing and interacting. If they don't get rid of that death card before the end of the mission, they have one more chance to get rid of that death card. And the only way that can happen is instead of taking their victory fleeting fragment, they disregard that fleeting fragment, put it back in the box, and then they can take one of their deaths that they had from fading and also put it back in the box. If they want that fleeting fragment though, and if they have one of those fading death cards, they will then have to slot both of those. So the only way you're going to get rid of these deaths is by giving up these fleeting fragments or even these enduring fragments, which are going to add to the strength of your heroes. So those are the challenges we have with this game. If we time out, we can get a death. If we run out of cards to draw in our hand, we're going to start fading, which may lead to a permanent death card. So those are the way our heroes get deaths. So that's what we have to be very, very careful about. So that is the basic structure of the Apocrypha Adventure Card Game. I know this is a lot of talk and a lot of things going on. The game does seem a little bit complex to be explained to, and it is a little complex to explain. But believe it or not, as you play the game starts making a heck of a lot more sense. Just basically follow the basic structure of the turns and how they go. Understand the setup of the game, understand the structures, understand the missions, understand how your Saints can die, how your Saints can continue through missions, and how you can keep evolving your decks. Keep advancing your heroes, continue to gain these fleeting fragments, work towards those enduring fragments, and go through these many, many missions to complete this grand campaign. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll be sure to answer your emails as quickly as I can. If you like this video, if you like this video channel, click that like button, click that subscribe button. As always, thanks for watching.